Horror content becomes a billion times scarier when it's based on true stories. For the 4th episode of American Horror Story's latest season, the creators have drawn inspiration from actual events. Episode 4 places the characters amidst a citywide blackout which actually happened back in 1981. Stay tuned as we compare how much of the show is really based on true events. Of course, there are some major spoilers ahead, so be warned. First up, what happens in this episode? Those following the show know that Season 11 revolves around a serial killer chase. There is a killer on the loose who is specifically targeting members of the gay community. Everything becomes far more dangerous as New York City, where the story is set, experiences a blackout. Many don't know that the city had a blackout in 1981, the same year the season is set in, so it seems like the show's creators drew inspiration from actual events. The episode titled The Choke of Shame features the characters battling killers and trying to survive during the power outage. As the fans stop working, elevators come to a stall and the streetlights go dark, there's a growing sense of danger and uncertainty, particularly for the gay community. The serial killer, aka Mai Tai Killer, uses the darkness to his advantage, committing horrific crimes. Meanwhile, Adam begins rallying the gay community to take it upon themselves to search for the Mai Tai Killer and the ominous Big Daddy. This blackout isn't merely a device through which the creators add a twist to the season, it's not just a tool they've used to amp up the suspense. New York City has a notable history of blackouts, and the absence of light certainly adds to the city's reputation for crime. It's no wonder that the creators have used this to their advantage. Although American Horror Story changes a few key details, the 1981 blackout is a relatively accurate historical backdrop for this season. Next up, what happened during the actual blackout? While there really was a blackout in New York in 1981, it was nowhere as devastating and horrific as the latest season of American Horror Story depicts. Of course, we kind of expected that the show had to exaggerate things to keep up with the gory tales it has spun in the past. The real blackout happened on September 9th, 1981, when the Big Apple plunged into 4.5 hours of darkness. It was caused by an explosion and fire in a power station. The effects of the disaster spread from Times Square to Battery, and it was the first blackout the city had experienced since 1977. As American Horror Story correctly portrayed, the blackout caused elevators to come to a stall, and there was an increase in crime. However, the effects were nowhere close to those described in the show. There was only an increase in petty robberies, and there were no reported murders. One other thing the show exaggerated was the weather. In the episode, the creators made a point of emphasizing how hot it was. However, the weather report for 9th September showed that the highest temperature was only 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's not true that the overwhelming heat contributed to panic and disorder. Moving on, New York City's long history of blackouts. New York has had many blackouts which have led to anarchy in the city. The blackouts date as far back as 1959, when a 5-block area of Manhattan near Central Park was plunged into darkness, leaving over 30 million people without power for around 13 hours. However, there'd been no chaos in this blackout, and there had only been an increase in misdemeanors. The next blackout came in 1961 when 500,000 people experienced a power outage. Although this outage initiated changes designed to prevent future blackouts, the city experienced another one just 4 years later. In 1965, a power failure that started in Canada enveloped most of New York. This one was huge. It was called the Great Blackout of 1965, and it affected about 30 million people in several states. However, contrary to what was portrayed in American Crime Story, in this instance, the outage brought New Yorkers together in times of literal darkness. The residents lent each other a helping hand through the 10-hour outage. So, did the creators of American Horror Story get it completely wrong? Did they underestimate the ability of New Yorkers to stay civil when nobody's watching? Well, if we look at the events of the 1977 blackout, it seems the show really got it right. Moving on, the real inspiration behind the show. The events of the 1977 blackout were unlike anything the city had ever experienced before. They were in stark contrast to the peace and harmony of the 1965 outage. The city experienced a tumultuous blackout on July 13th and 14th, 1977. This blackout led to citywide looting and higher reports of arson and vandalism. Crime rates were skyrocketing, and there was even murder on the streets. It seems like the creators of the show actually drew inspiration from this blackout and just changed the year to 1981. The 25-hour blackout of 1977 was caused by lightning strikes at 2 power plants. By the time electricity and order had been restored, there had been almost 4,000 arrests, over 1,000 fires, and more than $1 billion worth of damages. The airports were shut down, and the trains had come to a halt. Next up, drawing similarities similarities with the show. Just like in the show, the citizens of New York lived in sheer terror of a serial killer. The Son of Sam, also known as the 44 caliber killer, was murdering people left, right, and center. On top of that, a team of gangsters was on the loose under the direction of feared mob bosses. The blackout couldn't have come at a worse time for the city. There was an increase in record-breaking poverty, which meant that people had become desperate for necessities at this point. That's why the amount of looting was unprecedented. Around 1,600 stores were damaged, and 550 police officers were injured trying to maintain order. It was complete and utter anarchy. There was one reported homicide that occurred during the blackout. Dominic Siscone, a 17-year-old aspiring mobster, was shot and killed in the dark while hanging out with some friends in Brooklyn. To this day, the murder remains unsolved as the police couldn't identify any suspects despite the many anonymous tips they received. Another common element between the show and the 1977 blackout was the heat. Since this outage happened in the middle of June, temperatures were soaring. In fact, the city was experiencing a heat wave. It definitely seems like this year was the real inspiration behind the events on the show. Moving forward, what did the show get right? Despite the blatant exaggeration, the show's portrayal of the blackout is quite believable, and that's what makes it so terrifying. Ordinary things like getting stuck in an elevator take an ominous turn when you're with dangerous people. Although there wasn't widespread panic in the 1981 blackout, the events seemed more true to what went down in 1977. Many used the darkness to their advantage to commit unspeakable crimes. American Horror Story just amped up the crimes to keep the audience engaged. Finally, the scariest scene from the episode. The scariest scene was definitely where Daniel and Cameron are trapped in an elevator with Mr. Whitley. At this point in the show, there's no doubt that Mr. Whitley is the Mai Tai Killer. Remember that phone call he made to Detective Patrick where he said he's leading a reckoning? It seems like Mr. Whitley is fueled by a sense of duty and a sacrifice as he targets the gay community. This is something beyond the usual serial killer perversions and the thrill of the kill. We see Whitney tie up Gino inside a morgue locker in an uncomfortably claustrophobic scene. That's enough to make us terrified of this guy. We don't know about you, but we were on the edge of our seats when Daniel and Cameron decided to follow Whitley through Central Park. We know what you're thinking. Why on earth would you follow a guy carrying a severed head? But this is, after all, a horror flick, and characters in this genre do some outright stupid things. The pair follow Whitley to a powered area. They enter the apartment building where they believe he lives, and to their horror, he opens the elevator door for them. As luck would have it, that's precisely when the power blacks out. So now Daniel and Cameron are cramped in a tiny elevator with a homophobic serial killer. It really couldn't get worse than this. The scene then takes a more ominous turn in the eerie matchstick lighting. Whitley says that he knows the boys know what the meaty smell in his bag is. The fact that he's armed with a knife doesn't help. And that's a wrap for this video, my friends. What do you think about this episode of American Horror Story? Do you see something like the elevator scene actually happening, or did the creators just wildly exaggerate things? Please let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next one.